Yes.
a tweet that we posted yesterday that got plenty of traction. And I have no idea whether or not there's any truth to this, but when a guy who is a host on WFAN radio in New York, one of the most popular local radio stations in the entire country, and the place where Odell Beckham Jr. started his career from 2014 through 2018, when this guy goes on the air, Mark Malusis, and then takes to Twitter and says the same thing, I have to at least pay attention to it. And here's the tweet that got a lot of people riled up yesterday. Sources told me that the Browns and the Vikings are in discussions on a trade that would send Odell Beckham Jr. to the Vikings for a 2nd and 5th round pick next year. Trade is not done, but the deal is being discussed. And look, who the hell knows whether or not the Browns are inclined to trade Odell Beckham Jr., a guy they just picked up from the Giants a year ago? Who knows whether or not the Vikings are inclined to try to add him? I'm waiting for the statement from Rick Spielman, Chris, that Odell Beckham Jr. is a Cleveland Brown, just like he told us in February Stephon Diggs is a Minnesota Viking. I mean, no one's going to come out and admit there's anything to this until it's done, if it ever happens. So it's almost impossible to really peel the onion if there is anything to it. And if there isn't anything to it, the stuff people say is going to be no different than what they say if there is something to it. So we're just kind of stuck here to sit and wait to see whether it happens or whether it doesn't.
Yeah, well, you're right. We are. All right, so two things right off the bat. I know Mark Malusis. I've worked with him before, the Moose, they call him up here. I mean, you're right. First off, the place in which he works at, this is not like an attention seeker, type of radio host either. I would have thought he got this from somebody credible. This is not a guy that's careless in nature that way at all. So I think that deserves some merit, let alone – Mike, again, I don't know anything either about the situation. I sent out text messages to a few people that, I thought would be have some inside knowledge on something like this going down, and I got crickets back. I mean, no responses. So when I usually get that type of response, that usually makes me believe that something is going on, that there is talks, and nobody wants to kind of let it out quite yet. And yes, I mean, I think if the Vikings saw all this news yesterday and everything like that, they might have released a tweet or some sort of statement saying that's not going to happen, but they didn't do that either. So yes, I have no inside knowledge right now, but it's very interesting. And, it's let's get into the nitty gritty as far as whether we think it makes sense for both teams.
Well, from the Vikings perspective, they don't have a whole lot of cap space, although they have managed to add some by virtue of restructurings of contracts like Kirk Cousins. That freed up $10 million, and they moved on from guys. They traded Stephon Diggs, although that didn't free up a lot of net cap space because they took a cap hit by moving him. Yes, they avoid his salary, but that's offset by the cap charge. I don't see the Vikings happily adding $14 million in base salary to their overall cap picture this year, especially when you consider this, Chris. Odell Beckham Jr. is going to want a new contract at some point. Last year when he got traded to the Browns, there were some rumblings that he wanted a new deal, and it never happened. He gets traded again, he may want a new deal this time. And how are the Vikings going to do that? How are they going to be able to afford that when they have so much other money allocated to positions like quarterback? So I just think from a dollars and cents, I thought your dog didn't bark. I thought from a dollars and cents standpoint and a cap standpoint, it's a difficult move for the Vikings to pull off. And that's before we even get to, do they want the potential headache that OBJ brings to the team if he's not getting the football as much as he wants it?
Well, yeah, I hear you. You're right. I mean, if they make that type of trade, well, first off, with Odell Beckham Jr. last year, we just assumed really that he might ask for a new contract because of what Antonio Brown had done in his situation. We thought maybe that's what was going to go down, and how Antonio Brown had so much, force of nature to make his trade. We thought Odell Beckham Jr. might be able to do the same type of thing. Now, it's very scary. You're right, to the point of if you do trade for Odell Beckham Jr., will he ask for more money? You're going to need somewhat of a wink handshake with him and his agent to say, no, we won't even go down that road, for at least 2 years or anything like that. You're connecting dots between, hey, Stephon Diggs being a little bit of a diva receiver. Do they really want to deal with Odell Beckham Jr.? who hasn't had the cleanest history as far as being a distraction or non-distraction to his football team. Like, I get that. You're right. I mean, yes, I don't know. Did the Vikings want to deal with that? So that I don't know yet, Mike. But what I will say is this. I'm sure the Vikings are evaluating the draft boards a little bit and what they might get there in the mid-20s where they pick. And they realize that they have other holes on their roster to fill. And a trade for a wide receiver right now might just take one of those holes away to now they can use that draft pick for another position. Let alone, I think Odell Beckham Jr. on the Minnesota Vikings makes a lot of sense, X's and O's wise.
Well, and listen, I agree with you. I was on with Paul Allen, the voice of the Vikings, earlier this week, and we were talking about receivers in the draft, and I said, whatever they do, they need somebody who can take the top off the defense, somebody who can keep the safeties honest, somebody who can unclog the middle of that second level for when Dalvin Cook busts through it on a running play. You don't want to have an 8th or a 9th man cheating up into the box to stop him before he turns it into a 20 to 25-yard gain. And if you've got Odell Beckham Jr., you've got that threat. And whether it's going deep and drawing the coverage deep or getting that slant pass and just exploding past everyone, you're going to have to account for him. Maybe even more than you had to account for Stephon Diggs, all due respect to Stephon Diggs. So I agree with you from that perspective. If you can get Odell Beckham Jr. to buy in when you couldn't get Stephon Diggs to buy in to the fact that some weeks we're going to run the ball 40 times and pass it 10 times. Other weeks, the ball's going to be in the air a lot. It just depends week in and week out. Do you have the personalities to get Odell Beckham Jr. to accept that and not have this constant week after week after week narrative of how do we get the ball to OBJ? We got to get the ball to OBJ. And the Vikings franchise has been down that road before with Randy Moss and the stupid Randy ratio. You can't force the ball to one player in the passing game. You have to throw it to the open man. And
yes.
Here's the reality. If Dalvin Cook's running the ball like he did last year, there will be plenty of plays when Odell Beckham Jr. is open. We see Kirk Cousins do the little bootleg and the rollout and the play action, and Beckham gets open and Cousins is going to get him the ball.
Yeah, you're right on all. Okay, so yes, he's a lightning rod that way. So you got to feel comfortable with, yes, if you bring Odell Beckham Jr. in, people are going to put him under a microscope. How many times are you throwing him the ball? Are you getting it to him enough? Oh, if he didn't get it enough one week, the questions are going to come right away. Are you happy here? You're not getting the ball as much as you'd like. So, there certainly is that aspect of having to deal with Odell Beckham Jr. because he's, arguably one of the 2 or 3 most famous guys in the NFL right now on the big stage of things. Now, to the football aspect of it, Mike, you made a lot of good points. I totally agree with you. First off, I've heard a lot of people say, well, why would the Vikings want to do this? They're a running football team. Well, you said it. Yes, this is a team that wants to play 2 running backs, 1 tight end, 2 wide receivers. And within that, okay, yes, we know they want to run the football. And a guy like Odell Beckham Jr., hey, I know his stats weren't real sexy last year, but man, did he help out that Cleveland offense and made everybody else look better, even not being 100% healthy. People give him unbelievable attention. And it is no disrespect to Stephon Diggs, who's phenomenal, but he's not Odell Beckham Jr. Odell Beckham Jr. is a game changer. He's a guy that teams really go, man, I'm not so sure I ever want to leave my corner one-on-one with this guy. We almost have to double him every time it's a passing situation. And to what you said, Mike, is spot on. So now, okay, we want to run the ball with Dalvin Cook. Oh, there's Odell Beckham Jr. on one side. There's Thielen to the other side. You can have a concept built in the offense for a guy like Thielen to run some intricate route. But on the other side, you got Odell, and you just go, okay, if they got 2 safeties back, all right, we just going to run the ball to that side. And because they're going to be short in the box as far as being able to stop people in between the tackles. Oh, it's man-to-man? Hey, we like Odell man-to-man against anybody. That's really the style of football that Minnesota showed they want to play last year. It's a little simple and old school, but effective nonetheless, especially when you have the right talent to make it work.
A point made by our producer, Pete Demolitis, Stephon Diggs had 60% of the targets in 2019 that he had in 2018, but he had a career high in receiving yards in 1,130. Look, you get open, and if Cousins has time, he's getting you the ball. And a couple other points on this. I mean, this is something we could come at from every possible angle.
Yes, there's a lot of angles.
This question. Here's the thing. Why would it be that someone in New York knows about this? Here's how I think. And people get nervous when we speculate on sources, but I think when something like this comes out where you look at it and say, how did that happen? Well, if the Vikings are doing their homework on Odell Beckham Jr. properly, they're talking to the Giants, right? At some point,
yes,
you're calling up the Giants. At some point, somebody with the Giants catches wind of this interest by the Vikings in Odell Beckham Jr. and starts to get maybe some of the other details, and somebody in the New York media hears about it. Right? The Giants have no reason to keep this quiet. The Giants would like to create chaos. The Giants would like the Browns to have an upset Odell Beckham Jr., who's even saltier than he was last year because they're talking about trading him. They want to be able to say, we did the right thing when we moved Odell Beckham Jr., so if they can throw a wrench into the gears, so be it. So it's not all that ridiculous to connect the dots back to how this got out. And I had kind of the same experience you had where I tried to, you contact people and you try to get, and it's like something's not right here, like it's just one of those, and especially because you're gonna, and that's the thing. If there was absolutely positively nothing to it whatsoever, the Browns would be shouting
the Browns
would have
came out
right
no
now.
doubt.
You have to because otherwise you lose this guy.
No
the day
doubt.
they unveiled their uniforms, an hour before they unveiled the uniforms, this came out. You got to throw water on this immediately if there's nothing to it. If there's something to it, that's a different analysis.
Well, Mike, I mean, first off, I think you're a master at connecting dots. You really are. You've proven that to me over the last 3 years of working together. I know I'm like, I might not have a black belt in connecting dots, but I got what's the next one down? The brown belt? I'm on a brown belt. I don't even know. But either way, I think that's the big point, Mike. That's where I was going to go. If this wasn't real, you're Cleveland. You shut this up yesterday. You don't want to deal with this and have this talk. And now, okay, Odell Beckham Jr. is going to have to hear about this. If he doesn't get traded, this is going to be the number one conversation to start Cleveland Browns training camp. And also, I'll just say this, Mike. I don't know. Why would you want to get rid of Odell Beckham Jr. right now if you're the Cleveland Browns? I mean, again, unless he's more of a pain in the butt than I realize behind the scenes, through my football evaluation, I know his stats won't look as good as what we're accustomed to, but man, did he do a lot of good for that offense last year because of the attention he received from just about every defense he played week after week, and he wasn't 100%. And if I'm Cleveland and I got Baker Mayfield and this team right now that has plenty of salary cap space and really could be a team where we go, oh my gosh, they're one of the best teams in the AFC this year because they have that type of talent. I wouldn't trade Odell Beckham Jr. unless I got some crazy offer that just blew my doors off.
Yeah, 2 and a 5 next year isn't quite going to do it. That's not going to do it. But who knows? Who knows? Look, I personally think there's something there. Just based on everything I've seen and heard and what we're talking about, who knows whether or not it goes anywhere, but I feel like there's a little flicker, and we'll see if that flicker grows over the course of the next week. The draft is coming up, obviously, a week from today.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.